The phone fell from her hands. It hit the cracked linoleum floor with a sound that seemed too loud for such a small apartment, a sharp, hollow clatter that echoed off the thin walls and bounced back to her like a judgment. Margaret froze. Her fingers, swollen at the knuckles, roughened by 30 years of scrubbing other people's dishes, folding other people's laundry, mopping other people's floors, hovered in the air where the phone had been. Like they hadn't gotten the message yet. Like they were still waiting for her to finish typing. But the message had already sent. She could see the little blue bubble on the screen, face down now on the floor, glowing faintly through the crack in the case she'd never gotten fixed. The word delivered sitting beneath it like a verdict. What did I just do? She dropped to her knees. Slowly, painfully, the way a 61-year-old woman with bad joints drops to any floor, and picked up the phone with trembling hands. She read the message again, then a third time, as if somehow the words might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. They didn't. She pressed her back against the kitchen cabinet and slid down until she was sitting on the cold floor, her worn house dress bunched around her knees, her reading glasses still perched crookedly on her nose. Outside, the city hummed its indifferent nighttime hum. A siren somewhere, a dog barking 2 floors below, the distant rumble of a bus that didn't stop on her street anymore. They'd rerouted it 2 years ago, and nobody had asked her opinion about that either. Margaret closed her eyes. She had no idea, not the faintest shadow of an idea, that the wrong message she had just sent to a stranger would, within 72 hours, change everything she thought she knew about her life. Her name was Margaret Eleanor Voss, and she had been poor for so long that she'd stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a scar. It was just part of her now. The $7.14 remaining in her checking account. The refrigerator with the broken seal that made everything on the left side just slightly less cold than it should be. The radiator that knocked and hissed all winter, like it was personally offended by the cold. The one good lamp in the living room. The rest had bulbs she hadn't replaced because she kept telling herself she'd get to it. And she never got to it because there was always something more urgent burning a hole in what little money she had. She lived in apartment 4C of the Callaway Arms in A neighborhood that real estate listings had recently started calling transitioning, which was a polite way of saying that the coffee shops were moving in and the people who'd lived there for 30 years were being quietly moved out. Margaret had gotten a letter from her landlord 3 months ago. A rent increase, 11%. She'd read it 4 times, set it on the kitchen table, made herself a cup of tea, and sat there for a long time without drinking it. She worked, had always worked. Right now she cleaned houses 3 days a week for a service called Sparkle Home Care, which paid her $11 an hour and provided no benefits, no sick days, and no guarantees. The other days she watched her neighbor, Rosa's grandchildren, for $20 cash. 2 little boys named Tomas and Eddie, ages 4 and 6, who were loud and relentless and secretly the best part of her week. She had 1 child of her own. His name was Daniel. Daniel was 34 years old. He lived in Seattle. He worked in something called cloud infrastructure, which Margaret did not understand, but which apparently paid very well, because he'd mentioned a bonus once, casually, almost apologetically, and the number had made her set down her fork at the dinner table even though she was eating alone and there was no one to see her reaction. They spoke on the phone every Sunday at 6 o'clock. It was a ritual they'd maintained for 11 years, since Daniel moved away, since the distance between them became something more than geography. The calls lasted between 12 and 20 minutes. They were kind. They were careful. They were the conversations of 2 people who loved each other very much and were both too proud and too afraid to say the things that actually needed saying. She had not told him about the rent increase. She had not told him about the medical bill, the one from August, when she'd gone to the emergency room for chest pains that turned out to be stress, which felt almost funny except that it wasn't, because the bill was $1,400 and she was making $1,100 a month. She had not told him any of it, because she was his mother, and mothers carried things. That was what she had always believed, deep in her bones, the way you believe things that were never spoken but simply handed down, mother to daughter, generation to generation, like a piece of furniture that had been in the family so long, nobody remembered where it came from. You carry things. You don't complain. You manage. She had been managing for 61 years. But on this particular Tuesday night in November, sitting on the cold kitchen floor with her cracked phone in her trembling hands, Margaret Voss had just accidentally stopped managing. Let's back up. Let's go back to the beginning of that day, because that's where the threads start. Small and ordinary looking, the way threads always look before they tangle into something you can't undo. Margaret had woken at 5:15, which was her habit. She didn't need an alarm. Her body had simply decided, somewhere around age 50, that it was finished with sleeping past dawn. And that was that. She'd made coffee, the cheap kind, store brand, which she didn't actually mind, and sat by the window, in the blue pre-dawn quiet with her cup, warming both palms, and watched the street below come slowly to life. A garbage truck, a man walking a very old beagle, a woman in scrubs heading to a shift Margaret imagined was at the hospital 6 blocks east. She'd always done this. Watched people, wondered about their lives. It was free, and it was company of a sort. And Margaret, if she was being honest with herself in the 5:15 silence where such honesty was possible, was lonely in a way that had become so familiar she rarely named it anymore. She'd been lonely since Robert left. Robert, who had been her husband for 9 years and Daniel's father, and a man who was not cruel, exactly, but was the particular kind of weak that ends up looking a lot like cruelty after enough time passes. He'd left when Daniel was 4. She'd never remarried. There had been one man, briefly, in her late 40s, a kind man named Gerald, who liked crossword puzzles and grew tomatoes on his fire escape. But Gerald had moved to Florida to be near his daughter, and that had been that. And Margaret had told herself she was fine. And mostly she was. Mostly. After coffee came her Tuesday routine. She had Mrs. Petricus at 9. A large house in the quiet part of the neighborhood. The part that hadn't transitioned yet. The part where the original money still lived behind clean curtains and clipped hedges. Mrs. Petricus was 82, arthritic, and spoke to Margaret the way some people speak to furniture. Not unkindly, exactly, but without really looking. Margaret vacuumed her rugs and scrubbed her kitchen and spent 45 minutes on the guest bathroom where Mrs. Petricus's grandchildren occasionally visited, and she was done by noon. Then she stopped at the pharmacy on Clement Street. She needed her blood pressure medication. She'd been putting it off, watching the pill count get lower, telling herself she'd go soon, and now soon had arrived and she was down to 4 pills. The pharmacist, a young man with tired eyes who remembered her because she'd once helped him carry boxes when he'd had both hands full, rang her up and said, 1440. Margaret looked at the number on the screen. She thought about the $7.14 in her account. She thought about the $1,400 hospital bill. She thought about the 11% rent increase. She put the card back in her wallet. "I'll come back Friday," she said, which was what she said when she meant, "I don't know when I'll be able to afford this." He looked at her with those tired eyes and said, very quietly, "I can hold them at the counter for you." She thanked him. She left. She walked the 4 blocks home with her hands in her coat pockets and her shoulders slightly pulled in, the posture of a person who is trying to take up less space in a world that keeps asking more of her. That afternoon, she watched Thomas and Eddie for 3 hours. Eddie showed her a drawing he'd made of a dragon that he insisted was actually a dog. Thomas fell asleep on the couch with his shoes still on. She covered him with the throw blanket, the one with the small burn mark from years ago, and sat across from him in the armchair and felt, for those few quiet minutes, genuinely at peace. Then Rosa came back, paid her the $20 in crumpled bills, and the boys were gone and the apartment was quiet again. That evening, Margaret made herself dinner, pasta with olive oil and garlic, because it was cheap and she knew how to make it taste like more than it cost. She ate at the kitchen table. She washed the dish. She watched the news for a while, then turned it off because the news lately felt like standing too close to a fire. Then she picked up her phone. She'd meant to text her friend Carol. Carol, who she'd known since they both worked at the laundromat 25 years ago. Carol, who sent her memes she didn't always understand, and who called her Maggie, even though Margaret had never liked being called Maggie but had stopped, correcting her because some things you just accept about people you love. She'd meant to type Carol's name into the contact bar. Instead, because her reading glasses were crooked, because the screen was small, because her fingers were thick and tired from a day of work, she had opened a different conversation entirely, an old one, a number she hadn't thought about in a long time. And she had typed the message she'd meant to send Carol, a message that began with the words she'd been carrying around all day, the words she hadn't said out loud to any living person. I don't know how much longer I can do this. And then she'd hit send. The phone fell from her hands. She stared at the screen for a full minute. Then two. The message sat there in its blue bubble. Delivered. To who? She scrolled up with shaking hands. There were no other messages in this thread. Just a phone number. No name attached. And that one blue bubble like a confession floating in white space. She couldn't place the number. She tried to remember. Had she missaved someone? Had she accidentally contacted a wrong number from months ago? She pressed the number to look at the contact options. No name came up, just digits. She should have followed up, should have sent. Wrong number, sorry. With a little laughing face emoji, the way younger people did when they wanted to take the weight out of something. She knew that, but her thumb hovered over the keyboard and she couldn't make herself type it, because that would mean acknowledging what she'd written, and what she'd written was truer than anything she'd said out loud in months. And there was something about saying wrong number that felt like catching herself in the moment of almost being honest and slamming the door. She put the phone face down on the table. She went to bed. She did not sleep well. At 2 a.m, she was lying on her back staring at the ceiling, listening to the radiator knock, running numbers in her head the way she'd been running them for months. Income versus expenses. Shortfall. The gap that kept widening, no matter how carefully she calculated. The rent increase kicked in January 1st. That was 7 weeks away. The hospital bill had been turned over to a collections agency. She'd gotten the letter last week. She'd put it in the drawer with the other letters she couldn't deal with yet. The blood pressure medication. She needed that medication. She knew what happened to people who didn't manage their blood pressure. She'd watched her mother not manage hers for a decade. And then she'd held her mother's hand in a hospital room while machines beeped and doctors said words that all meant the same thing. She thought about calling Daniel. She thought about Sunday at 6 o'clock. She thought about his voice, which was warm and unhurried, which sounded so much like Robert's voice in its timbre. The one good thing Robert had given Daniel before he left. She thought about how he would sound if she told him everything. The rent, the bill, the medication, the drawer full of letters. She thought about his face when he was 4 years old, the day Robert left, standing in the doorway of his room in his dinosaur pajamas, looking at her with those enormous eyes, asking her if Daddy was coming back, and she had gotten down on her knees. Her knees still worked fine then, and she had looked him square in the eyes, and she had said, "You and me, baby, we're going to be just fine." She had kept that promise. She had kept it for 30 years. She had kept it through the laundromat and the waitressing and the cleaning, service and the neighbors, children and the nights of pasta with olive oil and the unrepaired lamp and the broken refrigerator seal and the drawer full of letters. She was not going to stop keeping it now. She was not going to call Daniel. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes and waited for sleep to come back. When she woke up, later than usual, after 7, which surprised her, she reached for her phone out of habit. There was a new message in that thread. She went very still. One new message, from the unknown number. She stared at it for a moment before she opened it. I don't know how much longer I can either. 4 words fewer than what she'd sent, but they landed in her chest with the weight of something much larger. She sat up in bed. Read the message again. The unknown person, this stranger, this wrong number, had not said, "Who is this?" or "I think you have the wrong person." They had simply responded, honestly, immediately, like they'd been waiting for someone to say exactly that. I don't know how much longer I can either. Margaret sat there in the grey morning light for a long moment. Then she typed back, "I'm sorry, I sent that to the wrong number. But are you all right?" She waited. The 3 little dots appeared almost immediately. "Not really. Are you?" She should have stopped there. She knew she should have stopped there. She was a 61-year-old woman exchanging messages with a complete stranger who could have been anyone at all, and every sensible instinct she'd developed over 6 decades of life told her to type, "I'm sorry to hear that. Take care of yourself and put the phone down." She typed, "No, not really either." And somehow, in the way that some conversations simply take on a life of their own and carry you forward before you've decided to go, they kept talking. The stranger's name was James. That's what he told her when she asked. Just James. He didn't offer a last name, and she didn't ask for one. He was, and this surprised her, in his early 70s, retired, living alone since his wife had passed 14 months ago. Cancer. Quick at the end, which people kept telling him was a mercy, and he kept nodding when they said it, but privately, in the dark, he wasn't sure mercy was the right word for watching someone you loved simply stop. "I have a son," he typed. "He means well. He calls on Sundays." Margaret stared at that sentence for a very long time. "Mine too," she typed back. "Sundays at 6. Does it help?" James asked. She thought about this carefully. "It reminds me he exists." "Is that the same thing?" A pause. Then, "Not quite. But I understand what you mean." They texted for 2 hours that morning. She burned her toast and didn't care. James had been an architect, retired 12 years ago. His wife's name had been Ruth, and she'd been a high school art teacher, and apparently she had filled every wall of their house with things she found: beautiful prints, photographs, a hand-stitched piece she'd bought at a market in Portugal they'd visited for their anniversary. James had not moved any of it since she died. He'd tried once and stood in the middle of the living room with one of her framed photos in his hands, and then put it back exactly where it had been and sat down on the couch and didn't get up for a very long time. Margaret told him about the pasta, about the lamp, about Tomas falling asleep with his shoes on, which made James send back a string of messages that she was fairly certain counted as laughing. She did not tell him about the rent increase or the hospital bill or the medication she hadn't picked up. Not yet. Those were the real things, the heavy things. Somehow it was easier to work up to them sideways, through the small things, the pasta and the lamp and the sleeping child. But here is the first twist. the one she didn't see coming. Before they stopped talking that morning, James asked her what her name was. She almost said Margaret. She almost said it automatically, reflexively, the way you give your name to a doctor's receptionist or a bank teller. But something made her hesitate. Some privacy instinct. Or maybe something else. Some small, slightly terrifying recognition that this person she was talking to felt more real too. Her in 2 hours than most of the people she saw in the physical world felt in a week. Margaret, she typed. And then, surprising herself, "But you can call me Maggie." She had never in her life liked being called Maggie. She liked it from him immediately. They texted every day that week. Not for hours. They were both, as James put it, people with a certain dignity about our time. But consistently, morning coffee for her, morning coffee for him. She told him about Eddie's dragon dog drawing. He told her about the bird feeder he'd put up in the backyard after Ruth died. Started feeding birds as something to do, something to watch, and how he now knew the difference between a house finch and a purple finch, and felt slightly unhinged about how much this mattered to him. "Do you know what you're doing?" She typed one morning. "You're giving me a whole little world to visit." "That's what Ruth always said conversation was for," he replied. And then, 3 days after they'd first started talking, he wrote something that stopped her mid-sip of her morning coffee. "Maggie, can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask," she said. "I'll decide whether to answer." "What were you going to tell your friend when you accidentally texted me? What was too heavy to carry by yourself that day?" She put the phone down on the table. She looked at it. She picked it up again. And then Margaret Eleanor Vess, who had carried things alone for 30 years, who had never asked for help, who had looked her 4-year-old son in the eye and promised they would be fine, and spent every day since making sure that promise held, typed it all out. The rent, the hospital bill, the medication she hadn't picked up, the drawer full of letters, the numbers she'd been running in her head at 2 in the morning for months. All of it. She typed for 15 minutes. Her hands shook slightly. When she was done, the message was so long she almost deleted it. Instead, she sent it. She waited. The response took longer than usual. She'd been staring out the window for several minutes, watching a pigeon navigate the fire escape across the street with great personal dignity, when her phone buzzed. "Maggie, I need you to go pick up your medication today. Right now, before anything else. Will you do that?" She blinked. "I'll pay you back when I can," she typed, misunderstanding. "No," he replied. "I mean, I'd like to pay for it. Can you tell me what pharmacy and give me the amount? I can call a credit card number in or Venmo you, whichever is easier." She stared at the screen. Her first instinct, immediate, fierce, like a reflex, was no. An unequivocal, non-negotiable no. She didn't take money from people. She didn't ask. She didn't accept. That was the rule she'd lived by. That was the architecture of her self-respect, and she'd built it carefully over decades, and she was not going to start dismantling it now because a stranger on the bar phone had asked her a question and she'd answered, honestly, and now felt uncomfortably seen. She typed, "That's very kind of you, but I can't accept that." He replied, "Why not?" She started to answer and stopped. "Why not?" he'd said. Not a challenge. A genuine question. And she sat there with her thumbs hovering over the keyboard and found, to her considerable discomfort, that she didn't have a good answer. Only an old one. A handed-down one. The piece of furniture no one remembered acquiring. "Because I manage on my own," she finally wrote. "I know," James wrote back. "You've been managing on your own for 30 years and you're very good at it. I'm not trying to take that from you. I'm trying to help. There's a difference." Another pause. Then, Ruth was like you. Independent. Took only 15 years to get. Her to let me do anything for her. I've always thought that was time we could have spent differently. Margaret read that message. She read it again. She looked out the window. The pigeon was gone. She typed, $14.40. She picked up the medication that afternoon. The pharmacist, the young man with the tired eyes, called the number James had given her and ran it through and said, "All set," with a small nod that felt, somehow, like he was in on something. She walked home with the bag of medication in her hand and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not relief. Something older than relief. Something closer to the feeling of setting down a bag you've been carrying so long you forgot it had weight. But here is the second twist. The one that made everything else make sense and broke her heart a little in the making of it. On Friday, 4 days after the accidental message, 3 days after the medication, she looked at the phone number again. She'd been looking at it on and off all week, something nagging at the edges of her awareness, some half memory she couldn't quite catch. She pulled out the old address book she kept in the kitchen drawer, a physical address book, spiral bound, bought in 2003, and not replaced because why would you replace something that worked? She flipped through the worn pages. She found it under V, the same number, written in her own handwriting. Careful, smaller than her current handwriting, the handwriting of a younger woman, next to a name. Vincent Almaro. She sat down heavily in the kitchen chair. Vincent Almaro had been her landlord. Her first landlord, in the first apartment she'd ever rented alone with. Danielle, a two-room apartment on DeKalb Street, just after Robert left. Vincent had been in his 50s then. He'd lived in the building himself, first floor, and he'd fix things when they broke without charging her extra. And when Daniel was small, he'd bring up jars of the tomato sauce his wife made every September. And when Daniel was sick, with the flu at age 6, he'd sat in the hallway outside her door for an hour, just in case she needed anything, and she'd never forgotten that. But she hadn't thought about it in years, maybe decades, and he'd died. She was almost certain he'd died. There had been a card that went around the neighborhood 10 or 12 years ago, that the number was the same, which meant the number had been reassigned. Whoever James was, he had the phone number that had once belonged to Vincent Almaro. And then, because her mind was now pulling threads faster than she could stop it, she thought about something James had said early in the week, something she'd filed away without fully processing. I was an architect. I built things. Mostly I built things for other people to live in. She'd thought nothing of it. People built things for other people. That was a job. But she thought about it now. She thought about it. And she opened a new browser window on her phone, and she typed a name she hadn't thought to type before. James, architect, retired. Too broad. She tried to think. He'd mentioned once a neighborhood. Not this one. One nearby. And he'd said he'd lived in the same house for 38 years. She searched differently, and then she found him. James Holcomb, 73 years old, founder of Holcomb and Associates, an architecture firm established 1979, retired 2012, brief profile on a local historical preservation society website. A photo, an older man with white hair and a quiet face and eyes that looked like they'd spent a lifetime measuring things carefully. She almost put the phone down. What did it matter who he was? But she kept reading. Holcomb and Associates is best known for their affordable housing projects throughout the city, including the Callaway Arms apartment complex on North Street, completed 1988, which has housed low-income families for 3 decades. Margaret stopped breathing for a moment. She looked around her apartment. The cracked linoleum, the broken refrigerator seal, the one good lamp, the Callaway Arms. James had built her building. She called him. She'd never called. They'd only ever texted. But she called him now, sitting at her kitchen table, her heart going in a way that made her very aware she'd just gotten her blood pressure medication and should probably be sitting down, which she was. So that was fine. He answered on the second ring. His voice was... She didn't know what she'd expected. It was low and measured with the slight roughness of age, and it sounded like someone who had learned, over many years, that patience was more useful than speed. Maggie, he said, and it was extraordinary how natural it sounded. A name she'd given him 3 days ago, a name she'd never liked until now. You built my building, she said. A long pause. I wondered if you'd figure that out, he said. You knew? I recognized the address when you mentioned it. The Callaway Arms. Another pause. I built it in 1988. I was 35. I was very proud of it. I wanted to build something that would last. Something that would actually house people who needed housing, not just people who could afford premium. She was quiet. I've thought about that building a lot over the years, he said. I've wondered about the people in it. Whether it held up. Whether it did what I meant it to do. It held up, she said. And then, because she was not a person who softened things when the truth was more useful, the landlord raised the rent 11%. I know, James said. I know that's happening everywhere. You built it so people like me could live here, she said. And now people like me can't afford to live here. I know. His voice was heavier now. I know, Maggie. She pressed her palm flat on the kitchen table. The linoleum was cool under her feet. The refrigerator hummed with its slightly inefficient hum. I didn't text you on purpose, she said. I want you to know that. I didn't do any of this on purpose. I know, he said. That's what made me answer. What do you mean? When someone says something true by accident, James said, it's usually the most honest thing they've ever said. You wrote, I don't know how much longer I can do this. And I thought, whoever you are, wherever you are. I thought, neither do I. And I wanted to talk to someone who meant it. She looked at the ceiling. My wife, Ruth, he said, used to say that the things that happen by accident are usually the things that were supposed to happen all along. She wasn't a mystical person particularly, but she believed that. I used to argue with her about it. A pause. I don't argue with her about it anymore. She sounds like she was wonderful, Margaret said. She was unreasonably wonderful, said James. It was almost inconsiderate of her. Margaret laughed. It surprised her. Sudden and genuine, the laugh of a person who hadn't laughed that way in a while. Can I tell you something? James said. You can tell me, she said. I'll decide whether to answer. She could hear the smile in his voice. Ruth left me well provided for. More than I need. My son, he's a good man. He'd be horrified if he knew. I was about to say this to a woman I met by wrong number, but my son wants me to give significant money to various causes before I die. He's very philanthropically minded, and I agree with him. I want my money to do something real before I go. Margaret was very still. I want to pay your rent increase, James said. Not once. Regularly. As long as you need it. And I want to pay the hospital bill. And he stopped. Maggie, I want to ask you something, and I want you to hear it as what it is, which is not charity and not pity, but one person who has more than enough trying to redirect some of it to a person who has been carrying far too much for far too long. The silence stretched between them. She wanted to say no. The instinct was still there. Still fierce. The piece of furniture, the architecture of self-respect. That she thought about what he'd said. There's a difference between managing on your own and letting someone help. You've been doing one for 30 years. Maybe it's time to try the other. And she thought about Daniel, about Sunday at 6 o'clock, about the careful, loving, insufficient 14-to-20-minute calls, about the things she hadn't told him. And she thought about her mother, about carrying things, about who had handed her this particular piece of furniture and whether it had served her the way it was supposed to, or whether it had simply, like a lot of inherited things, just taken up space. "James," she said. "Yes, I need to tell my son." A pause. "Okay, I need to tell him everything. Before I accept anything from you, I need to stop." She stopped, swallowed. "I've been keeping things from him for his whole adult life to protect him. And I'm starting to think I was protecting myself." "What do you mean?" "If I tell him everything's fine, then everything has to be fine. That's the rule I made." She touched the edge of her glasses. "But if I tell him the truth, then I have to be a person who needs help. And I've never..." Her voice caught, just slightly. "I've never let myself be that person, Maggie," James said gently. "Yes, that person. The one who needs help. She's the bravest one in the room." She called Daniel that evening. Not Sunday, not at 6. She called him on a Friday night. And when he answered, confused and slightly alarmed, because she never called on Friday nights, she said, "Daniel, I need to tell you some things. I need you to just listen. And I need you to know that I am fine. And I need you to know that I love you. And then I'm going to tell you the truth." He listened. She talked for 40 minutes. The rent, the bill, the medication, the drawer, the years, the pasta with olive oil and the lamp, and the way she ran the numbers. At 2 in the morning, when she finished, there was a long silence. "Mum," he said, and his voice was thick in a way she hadn't heard since he was very young. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid you'd feel guilty," she said. "Of course I feel guilty. I know. Mum, I have. Why didn't you?" He stopped. She could hear him pulling himself together the way he always did, the way she'd taught him to, the way she now wondered whether she should have. Okay, we're going to fix this. We're going to fix all of this." "I know," she said. "But Daniel, I need you to hear something." "What?" "I'm not telling you because I need you to fix it. I'm telling you because I was wrong to keep it from you. You deserve to know. You're my son. You're not supposed to be the person who protects me from the truth of my own life." Another silence. Longer. "Who have you been talking to?" Daniel asked. She thought about James, about the blue bubble, about the pigeon on the fire escape. "Someone I met by accident," she said. "He helped me understand something." What happened next happened faster than she expected, which was maybe how miracles always worked. Quietly, practically, in small legible steps that looked like ordinary logistics and were actually something else entirely. Daniel flew out the following week. He sat at her kitchen table and they went through everything together. Every letter in the drawer, every bill, every number. And it was hard and it was necessary. And at one point they both cried a little, which they handled by both pretending they hadn't and making more coffee. He set up an automatic monthly transfer that covered the rent increase. And then some, and he said, very firmly, but without any of the weight that might have made her refuse, "Mom, this is not charity. You spent 30 years giving me everything. This is me returning some of it. Let me." She let him. The hospital bill was negotiated down by nearly half when Daniel called the billing department and asked, politely but with a certain quiet authority that she recognized as her own, whether they had a financial assistance program. They did. They always had. She just never asked. She kept taking Tomas and Eddie. She kept working for Sparkle Home Care 3 days a week because she wanted to. Because the work itself wasn't the burden. The fear had been the burden, and the fear was lighter now. She got the lamp fixed. She replaced the refrigerator seal with a $12 part from the hardware store and a YouTube tutorial she watched 3 times before she understood it. Small things, but they were her small things, and they mattered. James came for coffee on a Thursday morning in December. He was exactly as she'd imagined. The white hair, the quiet face, the measuring eyes. He brought a small jar of homemade marmalade that his neighbor made, because he'd mentioned her love of toast and felt the marmalade was appropriate, which was so specific and thoughtful that she almost laughed. They sat at her kitchen table with the good lamp on and talked for 3 hours. He told her about the buildings he'd designed. She told him about the laundromat, the first job, the long years. He told her about the bird feeder and the purple finch. She told him about Eddie's dragon dog. He stayed for lunch, which was pasta with olive oil and garlic, and he said it was one of the best things he'd eaten in months. And she believed him, because he said it the way people say things that are true. Before he left, he stood in her doorway, the doorway of the building he'd designed 37 years ago, and said, "Ruth would have liked you very much. She sounds like someone worth being liked by," Margaret said. He nodded, and there was grief in his face, but there was also something else. Something that looked, quietly, like the first new thing. On Sunday at 6 o'clock, Daniel called. They talked for an hour and 12 minutes. She told him about James, about the wrong message, about the number in the address book, about Vincent Almaro's ghost living in a retired architect's phone, about how she'd always believed that things happened for reasons but had stopped believing it somewhere in the middle of a long stretch of hard years, and was starting to pick it back up again carefully, the way you pick up something you dropped in the dark. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "You know," he said, "when I was little, I used to wonder how you did it. All of it. By yourself." "I wasn't by myself," she said. "I had you. You were 4 when I was 4, Mom. You were basically holding us both up." She smiled. "I think," Daniel said carefully, "that you've been holding yourself up for so long that you forgot there was another option. Maybe," she said. "Maybe I'm remembering." 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. Not a bill, not a notice. A letter, actual paper, handwritten in the small, careful script of someone who'd grown up in an era when handwriting was taught as a discipline. She stood in the hallway outside the mailroom, the building hum around her, and opened it. "Dear Maggie, I've been thinking about a project. Something I should have done years ago. My firm, retired though I am, still has a name, and that name still carries some weight in certain rooms. I've been speaking with the City Housing Office about a pilot program. Subsidized renovation, rent stabilization agreements. Buildings like yours, ones that were built for permanence but have drifted from their purpose. I am not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you because you reminded me what I built things for. There's a meeting next month. I'd like you to come. Not as my guest, as someone with something to say. There are 14 apartments in your building, and I suspect some of those stories look a great deal like yours. Bring your voice. James. P.S. I looked up the origin of the name Maggie. It means pearl. I thought you should know." Margaret folded the letter. She held it against her chest for a moment. She looked up at the hallway ceiling. The crown, molding still intact after 37 years, she noticed. The bones of the building solid and quietly proud. She thought about 14 apartments, about the stories inside them, about all the people who managed on their own in rooms behind closed doors, running numbers in the dark. She thought about a wrong message, a blue bubble, a man feeding birds in a backyard where his wife's art still hung on every wall. She thought about Pearl. She folded the letter again and put it in her coat pocket and walked up the stairs to 4C. She had some calls to make. And then, as she pushed open her apartment door and the familiar smell of it met her, the coffee and the old wood, and the particular life she had built and carried and was now, at 61, learning to share, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Not James. Different digits entirely. She stared at it. A text message. 3 words and then a question. Is this Carol? Margaret sat down slowly in her armchair. She looked at the phone. She thought about wrong numbers, about accidents, about the things that find you when you've stopped looking for them. She began to type. And this is just the beginning. If you want to see what happens next, make sure you hit subscribe and become part of our journey.